Good day, Philippines, and welcome to Trendline PH, where we follow the facts, question the narratives, and examine whether major allegations are actually supported by credible evidence. Today's story centers on the testimony of the group known as the Brave 18, the flood control scandal hearings, and the growing questions surrounding the reliability of some of the claims being made. As more names are mentioned in public hearings, critics are asking an important question. Are these allegations backed by verifiable evidence, or are people simply being implicated based on uncorroborated testimony? Let's take a closer look. The controversy began after several social media personalities, commentators, and observers pointed to what they describe as inconsistencies in the testimony presented before the Senate Blue Ribbon Committee. Among the concerns raised was the repeated mention of individuals allegedly involved in the transfer of cash-filled luggage and suitcases to various personalities. Critics argue that serious accusations are being made against public figures and private individuals without corresponding documentary proof, physical evidence, or independent corroboration being publicly presented. Questions intensified after some witnesses reportedly implicated personalities whose alleged involvement appeared difficult to reconcile with publicly known facts. One example frequently cited by critics was the mention of Senator Leila de Lima, who was incarcerated during much of the period being discussed. Even some of the witnesses later acknowledged what they described as lapses in portions of their testimony, further fueling doubts about the accuracy of certain claims. The testimony has also drawn attention for naming individuals such as Father Flavy Villanueva as alleged recipients of luggage containing cash. Critics argue that such allegations require substantial evidence and should not rest solely on unverified assertions. Another major point of contention involves the repeated references to a person named Mark. Critics pointed to former Senate President Tito Sotto's statement that an executive assistant named Mark associated with him had already passed away years ago. For many observers, this raised immediate concerns about the reliability of the testimony. If witnesses were indeed referring to Sotto's former executive assistant, critics argue, then the allegation would appear impossible to verify because the individual had long since died. Attorney Levi Baligod, counsel for the witnesses, responded by saying that the witnesses were actually referring to a different person, Mark Tixey, executive assistant to businessman and politician Zaldy Coe. However, critics contend that this explanation raises additional questions rather than fully resolving the issue. They argue that the testimony itself has generated confusion over identities and timelines, and that simply asserting that a different Mark was intended does not automatically address broader concerns about accuracy and credibility. Baligod has maintained that the criticism stems from mistaken identity and that Mark Tixey is alive. Yet skeptics argue that the burden remains on the accusers to clearly establish who was involved, how they were involved, and what evidence supports those claims. For critics, the issue is not merely whether there are two people named Mark. Rather, it is whether testimony containing acknowledged lapses and disputed details should be treated as reliable without stronger supporting proof. Whether any of the allegations ultimately prove true remains for investigators and the proper authorities to determine. What is clear, however, is that questions about credibility have become a central part of the public discussion. When witnesses make sweeping accusations against senators, religious figures, and other personalities, many observers believe that names alone are not enough. They argue that extraordinary claims require substantial evidence, especially when reputations and public trust are at stake. The ongoing debate is therefore no longer just about one individual named Mark. It is about whether the testimony as a whole can withstand scrutiny. As the Senate hearings continue, one thing remains certain. The flood control controversy is producing no shortage of allegations, denials, explanations, and counter-explanations. But for many observers, The key question remains whether the accusations being made are supported by credible, verifiable evidence rather than inconsistencies, assumptions, or mistaken identifications. As more witnesses come forward, both the public and investigators will have to carefully weigh not only what is being alleged, but also what can actually be proven. This is Trendline PH. If you enjoyed this report, don't forget to like, share, and follow for more updates, analysis, and commentary on the stories shaping our nation. Until next time, stay informed, stay critical, and always read beyond the headline.